What was it like to live in America in the 1960s? Imagine a world in constant flux, where the winds of change blew so fiercely it felt impossible to stand still. Now, picture yourself living in a nation at the very heart of that revolution, a place where every corner, every street, every conversation seemed charged with the promise of something new, something bold, and maybe even a bit chaotic. That was the heartbeat of America in the 1960s, a decade that, more than any other, rewrote the rules of society, politics, and culture. Every moment held the promise of progress or a direct clash with old ideas. It was a battleground, not just physical but psychological, where the world seemed divided between old values and new possibilities. The world through a TV screen. Imagine sitting in your living room, surrounded by the comforts of your American home in the 60s. The soft glow of a hanging lamp casts gentle shadows on the walls. But right there in front of you is something that demands your full attention, a TV screen. What was once just an entertainment device had become a window to the world, a window that, almost magically, connected your everyday life to a distant, turbulent, and often shocking reality. By 1963, television had become the beating heart of the American household. But what you might not realize as you stare at that glowing rectangle is that it's about to change your life, your worldview, and even your sense of self. The moment you turn it on, that screen stops being just a screen, it becomes a portal. And what you'll see won't just reflect daily life but the very soul of the nation. On that screen, you won't just find 30-minute comedies, Western soap operas, or familiar commercials anymore. No, you'll witness the impossible unfolding, a world playing out before your eyes like a sci-fi movie, except it's real life. Imagine the impact of watching live, in vivid color, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the unforgettable first images seared into your mind. That moment, broadcast live, invades your living room, shatters the distance and security of your home, and rips away the illusion of a stable, predictable world. Everything you knew about safety and order seems to dissolve in those images, and all you can do is sit stunned as the whole nation asks, shocked, what just happened? Soon, you realize what you're watching isn't just an isolated event, you're witnessing a larger story, a narrative unfolding with no chance to look away. Because that screen isn't just a TV, it's a portrait of revolution, struggle, and conflict. Night after night, during every newscast, the country is shown raw and unfiltered. On that screen, you'll see civil rights protests, the marches through Selma and Birmingham, where brave men and women walk against an oppressive system. You'll see the face of Martin Luther King Jr., his eyes filled with hope, pain, and faith. And beside him, the faces of young people who, day after day, become heroes and victims alike, attacked and beaten, yet always moving forward. And all this plays out mere feet from you, without ever leaving your living room. Television will also show, in vivid and terrifying detail, the growing Vietnam War, a distant, invisible monster taking shape. What once seemed like a far-off war in a strange, exotic land becomes visceral and immediate, with images of American soldiers, your country's young men, sent to a place where death feels inevitable. The war, once an abstraction, becomes a nightly reality through live broadcasts revealing the horrors of battle, explosions, screams, and devastation. Once again, TV doesn't just connect you to the war, it brings it inside your home, into your mind, and into your heart. And if you think this effect only comes with tragedy, get ready, revolution also appears on that screen. There, you'll see the rise of counterculture and the hippie movement, with their music challenging social conventions, their long hair, colorful clothes, and a message of peace and love invading American homes. Woodstock, the greatest gathering of freedom and rebellion of its time, will be broadcast, and you'll feel the energy of that crowd united, shouting for a different, fairer, freer world. You'll hear Bob Dylan's words, his protest songs and anthems of hope, echoing through that magical screen, and you'll sense the wave of change and renewal sweeping across the nation. In this mix of pain, hope, struggle, and transformation, you come to see that the TV screen isn't just a leisure tool. It's a reflection of the collective soul of a nation. In every image, every scene, you see yourself, as if the screen is projecting your own fears, dreams, and existential questions. In the 1960s, more than ever, television became a powerful tool for social change. It brought the world into your home, but in doing so, it also transformed you, the viewer, no longer just a bystander. You became part of that story, a character in a history being written live before your eyes. So, the next time you turn on the TV, remember that screen isn't just a window to the world. It's a window to your own reflection, a window that, throughout the 60s, showed you humanity at its best and worst, but, most importantly, gave you the chance to be part of the story, to understand the struggle, pain, and promise of something better. In the 60s, TV wasn't just what you watched, it was what you lived. The battle for freedom and equality. If television shaped perception, the streets, stages, and public protests were the real battlegrounds where the fight for civil rights was waged. The 1960s were not only marked by the rise of counterculture and hippies, above all, it was a time when America had to confront its own sins and flaws, especially racial inequality. The civil rights struggle was in full swing. Men and women marched, protested, and spoke out loudly for what they believed in, equality. The civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and many others, didn't just change America's face, it offered the world a new model of peaceful resistance and social transformation. But it wasn't easy. The movement was marked by clashes, massacres, and a level of violence hard to imagine. The streets of Selma, Birmingham, and other southern cities became battlegrounds where hope met repression, where every march was a chance to redefine what it meant to be free and to be a citizen. The response came in the form of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, immortal reminders of an immense struggle and epic victory over oppressive systems that haunted the United States for centuries. But progress was not linear. It was a minefield where advances were often followed by setbacks, new battles, and new forms of discrimination. For many, the fight had only just begun. Youth spirit in the Cultural Revolution. While all this unfolded in the streets, another equally powerful but quieter movement was growing, the Cultural Revolution of the youth. A whole generation was tired of rigid norms, conservative morals, and societal expectations demanding conformity. They wanted more freedom, more expression, more authenticity. They saw the system as outdated and wanted to change it, or at least break it. The hippies became the symbol of this revolution. In a snap, young people left their homes, families, and even careers seeking a new way of life. At the famous 1969 Woodstock Festival, over 400,000 gathered for an event that would be remembered for decades, symbolizing the desire for absolute freedom. What began as a music festival turned into a cultural movement where love, peace, and universal acceptance were the mantras. Alongside the hippies were protests against the Vietnam War, reflecting a youth unwilling to accept the logic of a distant, pointless conflict. The country was polarized. While many believed the Vietnam War was a necessary mission to maintain world order, an entire generation was ready to fight, not the Vietnamese, but what they saw as the tyranny of a government that ignored their voices. The war wasn't just foreign policy, it was a matter of conscience and morality, and young people were determined to oppose it, even if that meant facing military and social repression. Women's fight for freedom. As if racial and political tensions weren't enough, a new battle was rising: women's fight for equality. During the 60s, women began questioning more fiercely and publicly the roles society forced on them. The image of the submissive woman, shaped by the gender norms of the time, was challenged on every level. In 1963, Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, a book that challenged the ideal of women confined to home and motherhood. The second-wave feminist movement blossomed. It wasn't just about voting or working outside the home, it was about women's liberation as individuals, women with the right to choose their destiny, to express their desires and needs as valid as men's. It was a silent revolution, but one with irreversible impact. Social change and technology. While the streets burned with protests, technology was opening new doors for America. The space race, culminating with the moon landing in 1969, wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was a celebration of the American spirit of exploration and innovation. The Flying Saucer of 1969 wasn't just a spacecraft landing on the moon, it was a symbol of a country's ability to reinvent itself and dream beyond the stars. At home, technology was sparking its own revolution. Television became more accessible, making entertainment and information part of everyday life. Radio, once the main communication medium, gave way to the new phenomenon of pop music and the rise of rock. British bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones became cultural ambassadors for rebellious youth. Radio played the soundtrack of a generation. Songs by Bob Dylan and other cultural icons were more than music, they were battle cries against oppression, war, and injustice. Underscore 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 underscore. The duality of the decade. Ultimately, the 1960s were a decade of duality. A decade of dreams, but also frustration. Of protests demanding freedom, but also battles fought in the streets and homes. A time of cultural ruptures, but also political nightmares. The future seemed charged with energy and indescribable hope, yet the weight of the past still pressed hard. The 60s were a battleground where the country's tensions collided, where promises of a new world met the failures of the old, but where one thing was clear: America would never be the same again. Living in 1960s America wasn't just about existing, It was being at the eye of a hurricane of change that still echoes in today's society. What happened in that decade was more than a simple chapter in U.S. history. It was a defining milestone in the making of the modern world.